everybody. Reporting to you again from the Glamour City, Hollywood.
You have much more legislation now than you've ever had. The cornerstone of EU legislation is what's called ETS, Emissions Trading Scheme. And if you're a manufacturer over pretty much any size, you are taxed every year. Whether a manufacturer, an airline, a friend of mine runs a small airline. His fuel bill last year was $20 million. He had to pay $5 million in ETS fees, right? And so everybody pays. And the only way to get out of paying is to come up with a carbon reduction plan to actually prove that you're reducing your carbon. But every country in the world is now affected by that. Another thing that's happening in Europe between 23 and 2025 is carbon borders. So if you're importing like steel from China, by 2025, you will have to pay a carbon tax on that steel, right? On the carbon in that steel. The US likewise has more and more of this. We did a study recently with Imperial College, and our clients globally are affected by over 3,125 different reporting or legislative pressures. Okay. So, and somebody like one of the large food companies would have like 2,500 different reporting requirements because they're global. So the pressure is just colossal. The average increase in the cost of capital, according to McKinsey, is 10%. So if you don't have a carbon plan, and if you're not achieving your carbon reduction plan, then your cost of debt is up by 10%.
If you love listening to this show, please consider giving a rating and a review on Amazon Alexa or wherever you listen. We want to continue bringing you this amazing content, and part of our ability to do that means that we need a big audience. Now, it may not seem like much, but rating and reviewing the show will help more people find us, just like how you found this show. Simply on any podcast platform, search for a show, scroll down to the bottom, and push 5 stars. It's that easy. Thanks for supporting the show. Today, I'm joined by Norman Crowley, founder and chair of CoolPlanet. Welcome to the show today.
Good to be here.
So you were recognized last year as a winner of the Business and Finance ESG Leader Award. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's nice to win awards. We got all dressed up. We made some good speeches. So it was very nice. I'm not sure I put a whole lot of stead in awards, but I guess every now and then it's nice to be recognized.
Absolutely. And then we'll get into why that's the case in terms of the recognition. It'll be pretty clear. But let's start with a bit of a background. How much generally are we talking about in terms of carbon emission that's attributed to heavy industries and manufacturing are we talking about?
It's probably about 40% of the total. Roughly the way carbon emissions work is it's industries about 40%, transport's about 20%, agriculture about 25%, and then a bunch of other sectors. So industry is the largest sector.
Mm-hmm. So tell us about what is CoolPlanet and how is your organization helping large manufacturing, mining, shipping, commercial real estate, pharmaceutical to food and beverage companies to decarbonize their operations?
So we work with the largest carbon emitters in the world. To give you an idea, our largest client emits more carbon than France. Our second largest client emits more carbon than the Netherlands. So these are vast companies in the food sector in particular. And what we do with them is we work on 10-year plans to get them to net zero. And we don't just work on the, on the planning of it, but we also work on the implementation. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. Specific to mining, for example, I believe you're helping companies to retrofit diesel power light mining vehicles to EV and using your software to then be able to actually monitor emissions and electricity consumption during battery charging. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, so background, mining currently is 7% of all carbon emissions in the world. And because of the demand for metals, That's going to increase to 10% over the next number of years. And mining is particularly tricky to decarbonize because 50% of the carbon emissions are moving, right? And so you need a different approach. So what we do is in their trucks, they have a huge demand to have electric trucks and also to have very safe electric trucks, because 30% of all deaths in mining are caused by vehicles. So they not only want electric, but they also want them to have very clever collision avoidance. So we've been working with a bunch of manufacturers, including Toyota, and have developed a light vehicle for the mining industry that's very electric and very smart. And then also working with the mines to make sure that all the energy that goes into them is green energy.
Fascinating. And again, we're talking about some autonomous vehicle capability, certainly maybe not level 4, but maybe level 2 or 3 ADAS capability, for instance, sounds like. But what are other ways that CoolPlanet is different from, say, other competitors that are in your direct space?
Yeah, so I guess what we've created is what we call DMS, decarbonisation management. And the reason for that is, if you think of the challenge that these large companies have, they have to manage everything from the electrification of their fleets, the bringing more efficiency to their factories, all of this. It's just a vast area. There's probably like 100 things that these organizations have to get right: green governance, green procurement. And they have to then work with a whole host of software products and companies to deliver that. And the teams in these organizations are tiny. You're talking about, in some cases, very large organizations having 7 people working in sustainability. Mm. So they don't have the time to go to all these companies. So over the last 12 years, we've invested over $100 million in creating what's called DMS, decarbonisation management software. And that it's a platform, and then the professional services and then the implementation capability to deliver it from one place. And clearly it's a message that's working, because we have 3 of the top 5 food companies in the world, 7 of the top 8 pharmaceuticals. And so it's clearly a message that's landing.
Well, I think you really help paint that complexity really well as some of the resource and people constraint as well. I wonder if you could go a little bit more granular in terms of the complexities, because the kinds of manufacturing businesses that you guys are helping oftentimes will have a global footprint. And to your point, we'll have multiple or many different subsidiaries and different functions. And of course, all sorts of different machinery, systems, and components, for instance, right?
Yeah. If you take somebody, I won't name the client, but one of the largest companies in the world, they have a scope 1 and 2 emissions of 1.2 million tons. And then by 2032, because they're expanding, they will have total emissions of 2 million tons. And that's spread across 80 different factories, 50 different ships. And so what we do first is we break that down. Where are they? What are they? And then we come up with a plan. And that plan then becomes the commitment of that organization. So then they make a global commitment to reduce carbon by whatever level. And then we break that into what we call glide path, which is we show them where they are today and what the glide path to zero looks like. And then along the way in that glide path are all the projects they need to do. And that could be hundreds of projects. And in this particular client example, their budget for the next 5 years is $350 million to get to that reduction point. And it's not all dead money and cost. That delivers to them a 5-year payback. So they get that money back. So they get to reduce carbon, increase efficiency, and then also get their money back. And then what the platform does is it tracks that progress, not by talking to people in the factory, but by actually connecting directly to the factory. So we know progress is real, and we can certify it because we're talking directly to the machines that were consuming energy and emitting carbon. And so it's a very powerful platform. It's taken quite a long time to build it, but it does seem to be resonating with people now, because the days of greenwashing and just telling stories about decarbonization are gone. People now need real results.
So just to make sure I understand, the decarbonization management system is tracking potentially hundreds, if not thousands, of components and systems in a global operation, everything from, let's say, the boiler room, HVAC, liquid cooling system, heat pumps, heat exchange, heat recovery, solar panels, you name it, from
and also ships.
And ships?
Yeah, ships, trucks, buses. So it's a lot of different equipment, and it's connected to them all the time. So it's talking to the machine directly. Yeah.
So I'm just thinking the initial effort to get this all plugged in, categorize it, right? Capturing, making sure all these IoT components and they're actually being properly, created as business objects and the business rules behind it within your system. The initial setup, I would imagine, could be pretty taxing. I wonder how that works, given the fact that some of these organizations, like you said, may only have a handful of people within their sustainability division.
Yeah. So sometimes it's hard and sometimes it's easy. So we have one client, one of the biggest players in glass in the world, and their IT infrastructure was so good that we were able to connect a factory every half day, so 2 factories a day. And they were up and running in the system with 90 factories very quickly. But then you would have a lot of US companies where energy has been very cheap and they don't have any metering management at all. And there you end up in more extensive 7-8 month projects just to get all the data you need just for one factory. The only good news about that is what we can do is what's called POV, proof of value, which is where you can start off with something small in one factory where you can get them a big saving very quickly in something that wasn't running properly. And then they can use the savings from that to help finance the next project and the next project. So it's okay to start off small and chip away at this. And also you get what's called OEE. You get much more operational efficiency from the factory, from the piece of equipment. And so the wins can come pretty quick, even though it might be a multi-year project.
So I think you're hitting on something that I was just about to ask, which is around the OpEx aspect, which is critical, is that it's not just a mandate to decarbonize, but in this process, because you're effectively creating a digital twin, so to speak, if they don't already have it, let's say. And in that regard, you're also helping them to understand not only the carbon output or reduction, but how they're operating, from an efficiency perspective. Can you get a little bit more granular, and specifically maybe using GE Healthcare or Zimmer Biomet or Bombardier as an example?
Yeah, well, rather than I guess it's tricky to talk about one specific client's examples because we got to clear that with their people. But if we give examples of one of our clients in the Eastern Bloc, a huge food company, they had a lot of factories in the Eastern Bloc, very big plants, but also very tight footprint of the sites. And we were engaged for a project late last year to not actually reduce carbon or not save money, but increase the throughput of the factory by 30%. Because they just didn't have space to expand, right? And so the efficiency applications are huge, And other examples would be installing solar and battery in a bus depot because they don't have energy capacity. So they're moving 80 buses from diesel to electric, but they don't have the grid capacity to be able to charge the buses. So then you can run solar and run battery and optimize to just get more efficiency out of what they already have. So, and that's important because a lot of people think that decarbonization is just a pain. It's cost money that companies don't have. But actually, it should be cost neutral or even profitable to do this. And if you're not seeing that, then you're not looking deep enough into the opportunity, is what we would argue.
And I'm so glad that you're pointing this out, because I do think that there could be some education or perception that needs to be reconfigured, so to speak, or reframed. And because in many ways, it's not just a cost center issue that we're talking about, it's an optimization model. And there are other softwares that do that, but you're coming from a different point of view with multiple different types of benefits, which is quite interesting. Now, one of the recent news I believe I've read about is the integration with SAP, and that allows for this real-time view of carbon emissions in their operations, and then helping to make sure that the decisions that are making is then real-time and informed. And what are some of the advantages in working with ERP companies like SAP, for instance?
I think you have to work with ERP companies, because if you think about, if we're working in like a vegetable oil plant, how do we know how much money we're saving unless we know how much they charged for that shipment of vegetable oil, right? So we have to integrate not just into the manufacturing systems, but also into ERP. So we need to know how much they bought the product for, how much they're selling it for, so that we can show savings. And then another point with the ERP companies is a lot of companies suffer from screen fatigue, right? The last thing they want is one more screen that they have to train everybody. This is a new system. You had a system last week, now you got a new system. So if people are familiar with the likes of SAP, then we can just push our content onto the SAP screens. And therefore, the time to value is much faster and much easier. So partnerships are critical. The other aspect of partnership is like in the next year, we will increase our software revenue by like $50 million, right? And in order to do that, you have to be introduced as a new player into the IT department. Whereas a lot of the time, SAP are well known. So a partnership makes it a lot easier for us to get access.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And certainly in terms of general trends within the large cloud players, is that they've kind of moved away from homegrowns to even acquisitions to more partnerships, and partnerships that are playing a more critical role for net new revenue and profit for them, but also for partnership, exactly for your point of view in terms of being able to have access to their ecosystem. So that truly is important. Let's talk a little bit about potential, let's call it win-lose game theory, in the sense of there's got to be some cases where decarbonizing a particular aspect of an operation could potentially mean slower output, or maybe manufacturing velocity, or that it's really not necessarily helping the bottom line. So how do they reconcile the fact that maybe it could be competing or have conflicting business goals?
We haven't seen that, I have to say. Like the worst we've seen is that, look, you've got to buy green energy, it's more expensive, but we'll get that back from you from efficiency. I think anyone and I would stick my neck out here and say, in any manufacturing industry or building, we haven't seen a situation across thousands of sites where there's not a cost benefit. Like the worst case scenario is it's like an 8-year payback. But even an 8-year payback guaranteed is not the end of the world. That then becomes a financing problem, right? You might say, well, internally, we're only signing off 2-year paybacks. That's okay. Let's get somebody else to pay for it. Take the financing cost off your balance sheet, spread it out over a longer period of time, that kind of thing. You know, honestly, if it's just raw cost and pain, then we would argue you're not looking wide enough. You're not thinking deep enough about it.
Let's take a step back and think about EU, but also, of course, UK, since Brexit has a different set of guidelines. But EU certainly has some pretty strong mandates. And I know in speaking with some even youth climate activists, one of the things that they're trying to push ahead is liability, including penalties and fees charged to those that are polluting effectively. So tell us about some of the legislation and policy that's happening in the EU, as well as Ireland and broader UK, and how that's helping to drive your business model.
Yeah, so in Europe and UK has similar legislation. You have much more legislation now than you've ever had. The cornerstone of EU legislation is what's called ETS, Emissions Trading Scheme. And if you're a manufacturer over pretty much any size, you are taxed every year. Whether a manufacturer, an airline, a friend of mine runs a small airline. His fuel bill last year was $20 million. He had to pay $5 million in ETS fees, right? And so everybody pays. And the only way to get out of paying is to come up with a carbon reduction plan to actually prove that you're reducing your carbon. But every country in the world is now affected by that. Another thing that's happening in Europe between 23 and 2025 is carbon borders. So if you're importing like steel from China, by 2025, you will have to pay a carbon tax on that steel, right? On the carbon in that steel. The US likewise has more and more of this. We did a study recently with Imperial College, and our clients globally are affected by over 3,125 different reporting or legislative pressures. Okay. So, and somebody like one of the large food companies would have like 2,500 different reporting requirements because they're global. So the pressure is just colossal. The average increase in the cost of capital, according to McKinsey, is 10%. So if you don't have a carbon plan, and if you're not achieving your carbon reduction plan, then your cost of debt is up by 10%. So there, it's fine that climate activists are pushing for more, but there isn't any need to push for more. Our clients are under phenomenal pressure.
Good point indeed. Now, in terms of the decarbonization plan, how does it get quantified in terms of, does it completely waive the ETS, or is it proportional to how much carbon a company is decarbonizing?
It's proportional. So if you pay ETS on the tons of carbon emitted, and so if you reduce it by X, then that's X is the amount of reduction in your ETS payments. And so where it all comes back to is in capital payback, right? So you're going to save X on your raw energy cost. You're going to save Y on your carbon, which then you won't be charged as much of an ETS payment. And then obviously you have all the kind of soft benefits. But if a lot of the major US companies that we would deal with also have an internal cost of carbon that's actually much higher than ETS. So when they're doing their payback calculations and ROIs, they're pushing in this internal cost of carbon. And we really noticed a shift in 2020, despite COVID, where up until then, people would be saying, look, carbon, yes, whatever, but we really want the bottom line here, right? How much money are we saving? Whereas ever since 2020, carbon has become a huge factor with US companies as well, because of these other pressures that they're under.
Mm-hmm. And this goes back to the net zero glide path and the criticality of that as far as prioritization of the decarbonization opportunity for exactly what they're talking about. And in that regard, certainly it's very easy to quantify the low-hanging fruit, so to speak. But what happens when we're talking about manufacturing, is that there are certainly efficiencies and better maintenance and so forth. But at some point, for them to decarbonize heavily, they may need to completely upgrade or start from scratch or certain pieces of the large machinery. Talk to us about that CapEx and investment decisions for some of these things.
To give you some kind of shocking numbers, by 2030, $4 trillion a year globally will be spent on decarbonization. And there are countless funds, all the major players, Blackstone, M&G, Goldman, all have billions in funding. And it varies from private equity type stuff, which is going into companies like us, to asset-backed funds. And then you also in the US, you have IRA, Inflation Reduction Act funding. So there is so much funding available right now for upgrading plants and new equipment, more efficient equipment. Honestly, if you're there at the moment and you're struggling to get funding, just reach out. There are so many funds and low interest, no interest loans, off balance sheet. It's incredible what's available when you compare it to 10 years ago. So we have a whole department that does nothing but handling financing, off balance sheet financing, helping structure it. To give you an idea of scale, in the last 3 weeks, we would have financed about $70 million worth of assets for clients.
Mm-hmm. All right. So early on, we talked about the fact that CoolPlanet is more than just the DMS, the software system. It effectively, I believe it's almost like a holding group There's the software types of business. There's even electric vehicles, educational services that appears to be pretty big, and even a recent acquisition of energy grid services. Can you tell us about how it functions?
Yeah, so there's a holding company called CoolPlanet Group, and then within it, each pillar of decarbonisation has a role. So education is critical because one of our clients has 110,000 people. So if you're going to decarbonize an organization with 110,000 people, it's a massive change management challenge. And people have other priorities. And so education, especially fun education, can help with that and does help with that. And that goes then all the way through to, because electric vehicles are a quarter of the solution for decarbonization, we have an electric vehicle business that mainly focuses on mining. But also we have a part of that, just to entertain your listeners, that creates 4 vehicles a year that are very high profile vehicles. So they're normally sold to actors or famous people. And those vehicles, what we do is we restore classic cars to very high profile, very beautiful vehicles. These things normally sell for multiple millions of dollars. And we do that to inspire people, because so many people are there and they're like, oh, sustainability is so boring and I'd much prefer a V8, you know? And so you have to show people something that just stops them from thinking that way. And when you show somebody, a famous actor or actress, in a $2.5 million vehicle, then you can change their thinking, you know? And that's so important as well, because we relate in our heads sustainability with the lesser, the least best option. And we need to change all that thinking to, hey, have you seen this vehicle? Isn't it amazing? Isn't it exciting? Because that then filters down into the day-to-day work of decarbonization. So it's a multifaceted organization built not just to grow and to achieve decarbonization and to make money, but also to inspire and to get people excited about something that actually over the years, people have gotten quite tired about, this whole decarbonization thing.
All right. So as for my final question, let's talk a little bit about Ireland. Ireland has some of the most advanced industrial and manufacturing firms like CRH, Smurfit Kappa, Ardagh Group, Ryanair, to name a few. And it also attracts major tech companies to set up shop there. Why do you believe is Ireland so critical? And also because of the concentration of heavy industries and manufacturing right in your backyard, that it really helps spur the growth for CoolPlanet sales and market penetration?
Yeah, it's a multifaceted. If you think about it at its core, a lot of major multinationals, Apple, for instance, Facebook, Meta, based their European headquarters or their EMEA headquarters here. And that began as a tax incentive type thing. Now with the consolidation of tax rates, that incentive is gone. But because it's the only native English speaking country in the European Union, so it's easy to base here. And therefore for us, it's a brilliant place to be headquartered, because we can trial new stuff with the clients that are here. But then it goes deeper for being based here. Like, one thing that Irish people are very good at is telling stories, right? We're legendary at doing that. And so it's a great base. Like, we're very used to getting out of our comfort zone, getting out of our country. Like, I'm leaving here on Sunday. I'm going to be the next 2 weeks in the US. Like, we're used to leaving here and going out into the world and spreading the news and telling stories. And so what's happened in the last, I guess, 5 to 10 years is Irish companies. What used to happen is you'd set up a company here and you'd sell it after 5 years, whereas now Irish companies are starting to become major global players. And CoolPlanet's ambition is to continue to become a major player globally. We currently operate in 23 countries, but we're very serious that Ireland is home.
Super. And with that, I have been joined by Norman Crowley, Chair of CoolPlanet. Thanks for joining today. If you've enjoyed this episode, take a moment to rate our show on any podcast platform that you listen to. Scroll down to the bottom and push 5 stars. It's that easy. And as always, thanks for listening.